We are continuing with topic number 2 in our managerial economics, and this is topic on production theory, production analysis. Essentially, this is a topic that belongs home to what we call the supply side of the economy. This is the side where we are having producers. This is the side where we have firms and companies who are producing goods and services in the economy. So as a way of introduction to the subject matter, we understand among the key issues in making decisions, managerial decision makers will be making decisions on first what to produce, when to produce, where to produce, how much to produce, for who to produce, and of course in the first instance the decision will be should we produce or should we not produce. So it's very important for students to understand that among the key issue will be those decisions relating to production and production theory. And now, once this production has been decided, yes, produced, key issue will be the factors of production that are needed to produce exactly the good or service that has to be produced, that has to be produced. When it comes to goods, we are talking about tangibles, things really that can be touched. We are talking about cement, vehicles, machineries, equipment. Those are tangibles, those are goods. But also decision could be on producing services, and these are normally intangibles, things that really we can't touch, including, for example, transportation, education, health, insurance. Those consultants, for example, those are what we call services, and of course they have to be produced. But before you produce them, you need what we call factors of production. And from economics point of view, among the key factors of production that a managerial decision maker has to make decisions on will include things like land, labor, capital, and entrepreneurship. Decisions will be, where do I get these factors of production? What are the costs related to these factors of production? How do I use those factors of production? So really, managerial decision maker have to understand exactly the key factors of production that they will need when it comes to production. And now, once one has the factors of production, or in the due course of making decisions in the production theory, key issue will be also on the production technique that has to be used. Within the production theory literature, key issues will be, should we go labor intensive, should we go capital intensive? So really, decisions has to be made here, and of course each decision that has been made will have implication. If managerial decision makers make a decision of producing using what we call a capital intensive mode of production, here it means that they are using more machinery equipment, they are using automation as opposed to labor intensive. Labor intensive production technique is this technique really that does not use so much capital and labor and machinery. It's not so much automated. It makes more use of muscles and human being. So here the question is really indeed at the end of in the decision making point, it's not either capital or labor. It is both capital and labor. Now the decision will be how much capital, how much labor, and the key issue will be why this amount of labor, why this amount of capital. So as I've always been telling my students, the key issue in managerial decision making is not really just making decision, but then justification of the decision that is being made. So if you choose to go capital intensive, what are the advantages that are associated with the capital intensive mode of production? They will include things like speed, precision, ability to produce en mass, to enjoy what we call economies of scale, standardization, you name it, and of course normally the unit cost will be lower when it comes to using more capital intensive as opposed to labor intensive. But of course the disadvantage of this is when you go capital intensive using machinery, equipment, automating the production process, somehow really employment will be reduced. Why? Because the machinery, equipment will be replacing labor, we are saying, as opposed to labor intensive. When it's a question of labor intensive, you may lose precision, you may lose speed, you may be unable to produce a large scale and standards, but again, you may be creating a lot of jobs at the end. So really, one has to weigh out between these options. So it's very important again to be able to make those kind of decisions. And of course, the other thing that production theory has to consider are issues related to scales of production. Scale of production. Should we produce en mass? That is, should we produce large scale and enjoy what we call economies of scale, or should we go small scale. So with economies of scale, from economics point of view, we understand the key issue is to be able to reap the advantages that are associated with large scale production, what we call managerial economies of scale, financial economies of scale, commercial economies of scale, as opposed to these economies of scale, which of course are advantages related to small scale production. The other thing that is very important within production theory that students should understand are issues related to factor productivity. We are going to use various factors of production: land, labor, capital, and entrepreneurship. Now, key questions will be: how productive is this factor, and what is it that influences the productivity of this factor? It may be expensive to acquire capital, machinery, and to automate processes, but at the end of the day, it may give you greater productivity. So decisions really have to be made in that context. So within production theory, those are just part of the key issues that one has to consider. And it has to be now related to managerial decision making. When one making decisions as a manager, taking decisions, but also really giving a command. For example, when board of directors are giving command to the management on production, now they should be able to consider exactly those kind of key issues in production and production theory. Cost analysis is one of the other topics within managerial economics. Elsewhere, it may be called cost analysis, cost theory, cost economics, exactly the same. So, in the context of managerial economics, the key issue is to understand that when one making managerial decisions, has to consider cost. So, really understanding cost theory, and the key issues within cost is very, very important. Cost is extremely central in a lot of economic setting. When making decisions on production, issues of cost will emerge. When making decisions on pricing, issues of cost will emerge. When making decisions on issues related to competition, issues related to investment, really, the question of cost will be emerging. So really, the cost as one of the major economic analytical tools have to be well understood by students of managerial economics because, again, they'll need this knowledge, they'll need this kind of issues that are discussed within cost theory in order to be able to make decisions that make sense, in order to also give decisions. Because, as I've said, some of those students in managerial economics are decision makers, some are really decision takers. Some are sitting as part of management, but also I understand some are sitting as board members, board directors. Not if they are not being so today, they will be sitting in the future. So really, they have to understand the concept of cost extremely very well in order to make decisions that make sense. Within production theory, we said one has to consider issues related to factors of production, and among those will be now issues related to cost. So students have to understand the types of cost that are incurred in the due course of managerial decision making. For example, they will have to understand that they will incur costs that are called the total cost, and others within that total cost. Now they have to understand that there are quite a number of issues in there. Within total cost, there will be a fixed cost and variable cost. Now the key issue is to be able to identify within my total cost as a managerial decision maker which are fixed and which are variable. Would understand that the fixed ones, there are costs that will not be changing, will not be varying with the level of output. Those are really fixed, including things like cost of permanent employees, permanent workers, including cost of insurance, those kind of stuff, including cost of business premises, house rents, etc., etc. So it's very important. But then some costs are variable. There's a cost that will be varying, that will be changing, that will be going up and down, depending on the level of output, depending on the level of production. For example, we normally say, if you use more factor input, if it's labor, if it's capital, if land, if it's entrepreneurship, the more of it that you use, then the higher the cost that is involved. So it's very important for managerial decision makers to understand and to be able to identify not only the total cost, but also really the components of that total cost. Another typical issue of a cost that any managerial decision maker has to understand is what we call average cost. One has to know on average, out of whatever I'm producing, on average, what is it is what we call a per unit cost. Yeah, if I'm producing 100, 200, 300 units, how much is it cost me per unit? And why should we know this? This has a lot of implication when it comes to pricing. Because business economics will tell you, you cannot set a price that is below your production cost. We are going to discuss this later in pricing theory. But then if you do not understand your average cost as a managerial decision maker, when it comes to making decisions on pricing, you may really find yourself making decisions that don't make sense. That's why we are saying managerial economics will give you a theoretical, analytical, economic tools to be able to make decisions that make sense in the world of business. The other type of cost that is very important for people to understand in this context will be a marginal cost. Marginal cost. And what are we talking about here? We are talking about the cost that is associated with producing one extra unit in the production process. The question really is not keeping on producing and producing, but the question is, what is it that costs me in producing every one extra unit in the production process? This will tell you, among other things, when to stop producing. For example, when marginal cost starts becoming bigger than price, now you have to pause a little bit and worry, because if you go on like that, really you may find yourself in the negative territory. Remember, the key theory that leads us in production theory, in economic theory, in managerial economics, is the theory of the firm. The theory of the firm, where we are saying the key issue, really, the baseline is profit and profit again. So if you're making a production, but then incurring costs that are bigger than revenue, and then move into the negative territory, move into the reds, that is, move into the loss territory, then it's not good. So really, one has to understand exactly those kind of cost and cost theory. The other key issue that one has to understand, of course, are what we call opportunity cost. Opportunity cost. Yeah, in the context of a cost of foregone opportunity. Yeah, when one is making decision, then there are issues, there are costs, there are opportunities, there are alternatives that are normally foregone. So you should understand, as a managerial decision maker, for every decision that we make, what is it that we are foregoing as a result of it? We said in production theory, we may choose between capital intensive or labor intensive mode of production. So when we choose a labor intensive mode of production, essentially we forego advantages related to capital intensive mode of production, and vice versa. So those kind of stuff, we should be able to see for every decision that we make, what are we kind of sacrificing. There is what we call within economics, what we call work-leisure trade-off. Work-leisure trade-off. If we choose to go leisure, if we choose to rest, what is it that we are foregoing? What is it that we are sacrificing in terms of work? So really, students of managerial economics and everybody who makes managerial decision making, use managerial economics for decision making, has to understand the concept of opportunity cost extremely well. The other thing within cost theory that really has to be understood is what we call determinants of cost. Determinants of cost. Elsewhere in the literature, they will be called cost drivers. Cost driver. What is it that drives? What is it that influences? What is it that determines my cost? Whether my costs are high or low, medium or not medium, what is it really that makes a decision exactly on that? For sure, we have said normally when it comes to determinant of price, it will depend on things like a price of the factor inputs. Other things being equal, that is ceteris paribus, the higher the price of factor input, the higher the price of the factors production, land, labor, capital, and entrepreneurship, then the higher will be the cost of the product that is being produced at the end of the day. Why? Because when it comes to pricing, one has to consider cost. You know, when we do cost theory, we'll come to talk about what we call a cost plus pricing. And a cost plus pricing, the key issue will be, yes, price your good, however you price it, but it should not be below your cost of production. The other thing, of course, within determinants of cost determinant will be output level. other things being equal. So ceteris paribus, the higher the level of output, then the higher the total cost that is involved there. The other thing will be, as you have said, the cost of capital. The other thing will be factor productivity. You know, the higher the productivity of a factor production, other things being equal, the lower will be the per unit cost. When you are using factor production that are very productive and that are very efficient, at the end of the day, yes, cost of production may be low. Yes, you may install that machinery, that equipment at a very high cost, but then if it is very productive at the end of the day, it may reduce your cost. And of course, issues of technology, etc., etc. And a key important issue to understand again when it comes to production as related to cost and cost analysis, one also has to understand that at the end of the day, really, the issues of making cost-benefit analysis is very important. We'll be making decisions on production, to produce or not to produce. Yes, produce. And now producing using labor-intensive or capital-intensive, maybe capital-intensive, maybe labor-intensive. But the key issue is, what are the cost-benefit analysis? What are the costs? What are the benefits? Which is bigger than the other? So those are part of the key issues that students of managerial economics should understand in the context of cost theory, cost analysis, cost economics. Understanding that this is just really a very limited introduction to the very broad topic of cost analysis. Yeah, so for managerial decision making, really, this should suffice as an introduction.